Welcome to the Positive Planet podcast. I'm Stephen Henry. I'm the founder of Positive Planet. I'm here today with Graham Hayes. Graham is a senior lecturer at Manchester Met University in sustainable innovation. Welcome to the podcast, Graham. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. It's a buzz with the Tory Party conference in Manchester at the minute, and lots going on around sustainability. Have you dropped in on any of the various things that are happening around the city at the moment?
I've not really, to be honest. I've been a bit busy at work with some projects we've been delivering, but I did on the tram in today. I saw lots of protesters, from Brexit protesters to people with the paper mache heads on their head and things like that. So it's a very interesting vibe in the city at the moment.
There is, there's a lot going on. I saw there's a sort of battle bus that's protesting against Shell and a few other big corporates, and so I dropped in on that as I was heading to the station yesterday. But it's quite interesting and interesting times around that as well. But not here to talk politics today. We'll come back to that. So today we're going to talk about sustainable business, the benefits of sustainable business particularly. I know it's something really close to your heart. And certainly the last year or so, you've been heavily involved in the EcoEye project in Manchester. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that and what you've been doing there?
Yeah, sure. So EcoEye was a consortium-based project. So it is 6 universities across the Northwest, basically working with SMEs in the region to help them innovate towards sustainability, essentially. So each institute took their own approach, but at MMU, or Manchester Met, where I work, we very much focused on giving businesses sort of strategic supports in the first instance. So we basically ran a sustainable design sprint where we'd get businesses to come in and in basically 2 days leave with the bare bones of a decarbonisation strategy. And then from that, they could either go on to implement that themselves, and we got so many examples of businesses completely reorganizing what they do as an organization based on those sessions. But then businesses who identify interesting but difficult things to do, that's where we'd pair them with academics in the university. Okay. So it was a really unique program in the end, because businesses were developing strategies, implementing them, but then we were also helping businesses to do things like use 3D printing in the business to reduce supply chain emissions, building anaerobic digesters to deal with organic wastes, hydrogen. We had a lot of projects using hydrogen fuel cells and things like that. So really cutting edge, as well as just sort of more of the strategic side of things.
Yeah.
So,
and what kind of business, what sort of sectors were you working with?
It was completely sector agnostic. So anyone, as long as you were an SME in Manchester, you were welcome to come on. So it was an ERDF funded project. So as long as you were a small to medium-sized business in the Northwest, you were basically able to come onto the programme. And it was great. We served over 100 businesses in the end, from what we did at Manchester Met in a year, which I think was quite good going.
Yeah.
And we're really proud of what we've done, because we found we got real impact from the businesses we worked with. And the feedback we got was really good, because I think a lot of programmes focus on things like replacing your light bulbs or getting an electric vehicle fleet and stuff like that, which are all great things that all businesses should do. But we were really trying to get businesses to think a bit more deeply about the climate problem, and not looking at as this policy in place that tells businesses you've got to reduce your carbon footprint. So businesses think carbon is the problem. Yeah. But really, carbon is a symptom of business models and processes that aren't really fit for a sustainable society. So we try to get that pivot moment to get them to switch to think more strategically about what they do, why they do it, and how they do it.
Yeah. And was it focused at a product level or more as an organisational level? Were you looking at wider business process or particularly at products?
Anything, really. Okay. So that was the beauty of the programme. We'd get businesses in, we would talk about climate change from a very broad level and talk about what are the impacts on society, what is the policy that's coming into place, what are the risks of that link to your business and your products or services. And then we'd get the businesses to come up with sort of future strategic visions that they could work towards, which is always quite a good moment where you get a lot of light bulb moments where people go, right, so if this is going to happen, my business needs to change, otherwise it won't exist in the future. Yeah. So that was quite powerful. But then it was all about looking at your business model, looking at the things you do as an organisation, identifying the impacts, positive or negative, and then prioritising them. Because if there's something that's really, really difficult to do, but has really high emissions, that's definitely something a business should do. Yeah. But, this is really difficult stuff. And if you're a small business who's never engaged in this stuff before, going straight away for those big ticket items can be really tough, because you've got no idea how to do them. Yeah. So although we do push for that stuff, as you know, based on the urgency of the climate emergency, we do acknowledge and support the businesses to sort of work on the easier bits first, embed that knowledge and expertise in the organisation, and then move on to the bigger things.
Yeah, great.
Over time.
And what brought those businesses to the EcoEye program? You know, what was the driver for them in starting that?
Yeah, I get that question quite a lot, and when I think about it, I always come down to sort of three broad categories. You have businesses that the owner of the organisation has typically, you know, watched an Attenborough documentary or read a certain book and had a light bulb moment and said, right, this is the thing that my business wants to do. Or we had a lot of supply chain pressure of businesses saying we need to start providing a sustainability strategy when we bid for work, otherwise we're not going to get that work anymore. Yeah. And then a lot of businesses impacted by policy changes. So when the Clean Air Bill was going to be introduced in Manchester, there was a lot of businesses coming on because they were like, my business model no longer stacks up for the policy that's in place, which I really liked, actually, because it shows the value of policy as being a driver for change. Because, not to get too academic, but if you look at the history of businesses, a business does what the market wants and what is defined as legal by the government. So that's why we had things like child labour laws come in place and landfill tax and stuff like that. And now we're starting to see more of these policies come into place to make businesses internalise issues that normally are just said, you know, externalised. So that the environment isn't our problem, or society isn't our problem. That's for the government to deal with. And now the policies coming into place to say, no, you now need to think about those things in your organisation. Yeah.
It's really interesting, and we talk about those three things that you mentioned there in a slightly different way, but they link directly back to the same categories, which is a sort of want to do, need to do, and have to do. And those want to do businesses are typically where sustainability is at the heart of the DNA as a brand. It's been there probably since they started, or something that's really, really close to their heart. And Patagonia would be a really good example of an organisation like that. You've then got those need to do's where they're driven by, as you talked about, some market pressures maybe, and we see a lot of organisations where they're being moved towards taking action because they're being asked that question in things like bid documents, tenders, etc. And they're seeing some competitive pressures, perhaps they're seeing some movement within their sector, and the have to do's are then being hit by regulation, and there's more and more of that starting to come into play. And I'm sort of torn a bit on some of that as well, you know, and I wonder whether we're driving some of the right outcomes, whether that changes a bit on the regulatory side in terms of how people perceive sustainability and net zero, particularly when they're being forced to take action. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think it's driving the right outcomes, or do you think it's potentially having an adverse effect?
That's a really good question, because I think stuff like that can lead to sort of CSR and like triple bottom line sort of approaches where it's just, right, we've got to do this, it's a tick box exercise. And you know, it really breaks my heart when you see how much effort, like all the people who work in businesses developing environmental strategies, corporate reporting of any type, they spend so long on these reports to comply with regulation, which is great, they've done that, but then I always wonder who actually reads these documents. There's so many thousands, if not millions, of sustainability reports that exist online, and I'm not sure if they are ever really used to help guide the business in what they're doing necessarily all the time, or if anyone reads them. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think it can just lead to sort of going, right, we've done our bit now, we've written our report and said that when someone goes to the bathroom, the lights switch off while they're in there, and they have an interest in the dark experience. But does that actually challenge the businesses to really think about what they do at a core level? Because when you look at the scale of the climate emergency and the things that businesses have to do in terms of completely reorganising their activity, that doesn't really come across in that sort of reporting. I think, just to touch on a couple of those points, one, I think people do definitely look at them, because I see us getting business back from that. So where we've done some of those reports for clients, people will come to us and say, I've seen this for a particular client and we need to do or want to do the same thing. So they're definitely being engaged with, and people are often inspired by that as well. And I think that leadership piece, I think when it's done well, and that's the bit that makes me worried about some of the legislative piece, is that often it's done, as you described, as that tick box activity, and it's done to minimum requirements, if you like.
I think the other element around some of that, and I think you just touched on there, is that concept of how much change is required as well, you know, and it's that can be really daunting. And I think if you're forced down something that feels like we've got to do something massive, and you haven't engaged with that through a positive means, that's not a good way of starting a change program.
Yeah.
And I read some interesting stats the other day. It's something like 9 out of 10 corporate change programs fail, and it's even higher on sustainability programs. And I suspect some of that forcing businesses to take action results in a kind of, we've done it, we've complied, but actually it's been put on the shelf thereafter.
Yeah. I think there's two interesting things there. I think it's great to hear someone say that these sort of reports do get actually used by people, and when people have been influenced by them, because I think that's if you're talking about or thinking about the benefits to a business of acting on sustainability, I think one of the key ones is when you can become a leader in your field.
Yeah.
The benefits of that are so powerful. And what I hear a lot from small businesses is that, you know, if we're selling products to big multinationals, we're motivated by this agenda, but there's no way we could ever engage with a big international supply chain organization. And I used to agree with them, but I've seen so many examples from the EcoEye project of small businesses working with bigger suppliers to activate change in those organizations, because there's such a skill shortage with sustainability. And you'll know what a lot of businesses do when they start to do this agenda is, rather than hire a sustainability expert, they'll just promote somebody in their team. So a facilities manager or a health and safety person gets sustainability added on. And you see them do amazing things and pick up loads of skills, but there's a lot of learning to do.
Yeah.
And if you're a small business who's got really good practice, I think bigger businesses are receptive to that support and expertise. So I've seen a lot of really small SMEs and things like manufacturing who are working with big fast fashion retailers. Not only have they changed their own business in ways that have really blown me away, but they're now working with bigger businesses to pass on their expertise by showing them how to be more sustainable. And they're winning loads of business from doing that, as well as the reputational benefits and all that sort of stuff.
And I think that leadership piece is really underestimated. And I think there's two elements. It is, as you've described, that you can influence others within your wider stakeholder group. I think it's really essential in the whole net zero process. And it's a really critical part that businesses can play in this. I think businesses are critical to net zero. And I think that ability to influence others, be it I can influence our customers, our clients, our supply chain, our investors, the people that work with us as well, you know, and seeing changes of behaviours there is really important in that leadership piece. And as you say, it can bring significant brand benefits in that as well. We see that quite a lot with clients. So
I think it's communication and engagement are two really important things that often get missed. So if you're going to go to the effort of becoming a sustainable business, you need to put a lot of effort and time into talking about it. So you do reap those benefits because they are part of the reason why businesses go in this journey, but also to help other people follow your example and develop a community of practice, just to share your expertise and just to motivate people to want to change as well. Yeah. Because there's still a lot of people who haven't started that journey and don't quite understand the science behind it or the scale of the urgency.
Or the opportunity as well. And that's one of the things that really interests me about net zero and the opportunities it creates is the big thing. And I see this as it's really like a green revolution that's not talked about in a positive enough a way often for businesses, and that it's seen as being something that's going to bring. I think often organisations look at this and think, oh, it's negative change. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of reporting. There's a lot of things we have to do. And then you look at these massive goals, and then you hear things like we've got to get 90% decarbonisation by 2050. And you think, I don't even know if we'll be around, you know? And I think too many organisations are defeated by some of those big challenges and don't see what maybe the shorter term opportunities, the near term opportunities are. And that's one of the things I was really interested in the EcoEye program, you know, is how you've supported organisations to identify what some of those near time changes are and supported them to do that without it being something that has to derail your business, cost huge amounts, but it brings that immediate opportunity and benefit from that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we do try to push businesses towards the more radical step changes that they need to do, but just getting the ball rolling is so important because it helps you understand the challenge, get used to change, get used to being innovative, and you know that innovation is a skill in itself. And it's, forget about sustainability, just having a general time and ability to do horizon scanning and to understand how the world's changing and what your business looks like in that future world is such a difficult task when you're already firefighting every day, solving random things that pop up, winning new business, just keeping the business functional and running. It's really difficult. I know in the productivity world, there's a movement at the moment called slow productivity, which is about, instead of thinking about productivity on how much stuff can I get done in a day, you need to think about productivity about what's truly going to further my career or my business in 5 or 10 yearly cycles. Because that's real productivity. That's the stuff that's going to drive you forward to help you succeed in whatever you want to succeed in. And to do that, it's sort of about slowing down in a way and just creating space somehow in your day or in your week, creating at least a one window a week where you can actually stop and go, right, what do I need to start thinking about next? And as soon as you start to do that, climate change, sustainability, responsibility, all these things are going to become clear business imperatives for the future. And that will help with things like, so change is difficult because change implies risk, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to do. And when you do it, you don't know if it's necessarily going to work. You might have to bring in new people, train people to do things differently. So all these things are risks. But when you compare it to the risk of inaction, you start to see the maths add up. And when you add in all the opportunities from change, such as efficiencies, enhanced brand reputation, and taking the leadership for your sector, winning new business, you can see that all of a sudden the rationale for changing rather than business as usual starts to open up a bit more.
And it is that whole efficiency piece is massive. Most sustainable businesses are more efficient and well-run businesses with less waste, lower overhead costs. The shift to renewable energy, if you can generate on site, is typically a lower cost. I appreciate it has some upfront investment requirements, but it gives a lower cost of energy generation and stabilizes that as well. So it's what's being preached often here and required is really good business practice that delivers those benefits back. That whole leaner, cleaner, greener model, as we would talk about it, can deliver some real wins for an organization as well. And that comes back to things like business process as well. So just keen to understand, when you were doing business process change, what were the types of things that you were seeing and looking at on the EcoI program with organizations, and what did they get as a typical, what kind of efficiencies were you seeing there?
It would depend so massively on the type of business. Typically, it would be things like energy, and transport would be the biggest ones, because we're typically working with SMEs, so we would very rarely had like large organizations of massive global chains. There was some like large SMEs who had that, and then we'd start to look at things like supply chains and things like that. But generally, it would be things like transport typically, and operating costs on sites. But the other part of this is a lot of businesses actually don't have massive emissions. So like the example I like to give is there was a recruiting firm who came on, a really small recruiting business, just a couple of people who worked from home, and they wanted to know how they could become more sustainable, more efficient. And after working with them, I was like, there's not that much you could do, because you're just working from a laptop at home. Your emissions are quite small, so even if you became carbon neutral, that's not going to make any difference to the scale of the problem. But you're putting people into jobs in the workforce who can then go on and have a change. And I think sometimes you've got to sort of think about those sorts of efficiencies and how you can implement them in your business. But sometimes it's about what's the positive change that you can have as well. So there's football clubs I've worked with, another good example. Football clubs can have, they get a lot of pressure because they're in the limelight as football clubs. But most football clubs are SMEs, really. They operate on a loss. They have a very local customer base outside of the Premier League. Their emissions are generally quite low once you take out staff travel. But the ability of football clubs to communicate and engage with communities is second to none, really. So I think that's a huge thing that we saw with a lot of the businesses that we work with on EcoI. It's what are the positive impacts that you can have, as well as reducing the negative impacts.
We see that there's often a real challenge for service-related businesses in terms of what they can do themselves, but that ability to influence out is often massive. And the football club bit's really interesting as well. We work with Aberdeen Football Club, and that was one of the things that really interested me about working with the club, was the opportunity to work with both the sponsors, the suppliers, the supporters, at the players themselves in terms of how they influence people with their behaviours, and typically a group that's not very good at doing that as well. So the ability to change and influence a whole community is quite significant through sports clubs. So it's a real interesting opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an area I'd love to see doing more. I think they talk about it, but we don't quite see the actions coming through really from them. But
I think that's part of it though, is working out who is your community and how can you engage with them. And for a lot of businesses, it will be supply chain based. So I know at Manchester Met, we're looking at our suppliers at the moment because we've got a ridiculous amount of suppliers in like the tens of thousands, and that's such a huge audience of businesses who we can work with to try to help them go on their sustainability journey as well. So I know that's something that we're hopefully looking at in the future. And I think that for most businesses, if you can create a community of practice with your own supply chain, as well as your local community, your employees are particularly important, because if you're trying to implement change, you need to take them with you on the journey by giving them buy-in, which is where things like carbon literacy is really valuable. So you can help people understand what is climate change, why is it important to your business, what do you need to do differently in your job roles.
And I think influencing your employees and your team through things like carbon literacy to change behaviours at home is where things like service-related businesses can start to have a broader impact as well, can add real value. One of the other things we see is the opportunity to attract talent as well. You touched on a recruitment consultancy there, and we see that as being a big opportunity for businesses. We're seeing real shift in terms of behaviours amongst the workforce. In the next 5 years, quite frighteningly, 75% of the workforce will be millennials, and their attitude towards sustainability is massively different. And we're seeing approximately half of them making decisions where they would take lower salary to work with more sustainable or more purpose-driven businesses, and wanting to see that the organisations they work for are doing something worthwhile. And we see that internally as well. We see some of those pressures in organisations to change coming from from the team really, and from their employees, and forcing some of that change. It starts with simple things like we need recycling bins and we need to do other things and switch the lights off when you leave the room, but then fast moves into other parts of the business process. So I think organisations haven't quite grasped that perhaps in terms of the size of that opportunity, but if you're looking to bring in quality talent into your business and retain people, sustainability is becoming a real key factor. I think that's going to play an even bigger role in the future. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the advantages of doing that is because there are huge skills gaps in sustainability. There's not enough people going around with the expertise to serve the amount of businesses that we have. And what businesses, as we mentioned before, businesses tend to sort of hire from within a lot of the time, because if you're looking at changing a business, you may as well bring in someone who knows the business inside and out. So facilities managers are a great start. And I often get people who are interested in this agenda. They'll be working in a business and they say to me, I'm thinking about leaving my company to do a master's or to do an undergraduate degree in sustainability or environmental management. What's your advice? And I always say, it's up to you, it's a personal decision, but I would not necessarily do it, because if you're in an organisation, you have so much capacity to have impact and to lead on this issue. And if there isn't somebody in that sustainability role, you can put yourself forward and try to get the opportunity to take on that sort of work. And because if you leave a job to go into training to become a qualified environmental manager or whatever you might classify yourself as, you then spend a lot of time trying to get back into industry, back into a job. Even though there are skill shortages, it's still quite difficult to get into one of those positions. So I think that if you can focus on attracting a workforce who are motivated by this agenda, you're going to be able to deliver on these things a lot more easily, because there's going to be people in your workforce who are going to already understand the basics, already be motivated by the change, and be more likely to take other people on board with you in that journey.
And we see some of that in our team. We've got people who are really passionate about things like equality, diversity, inclusion, about wellness at work and mental health issues and things like that. And they drive that agenda forwards themselves. And that's evolved us as an organisation. It's been really valuable to have people in the business that have that passion and are keen to bring those things to bear within the organisation as well. So, I get that. The other bit that we're seeing quite a lot of around benefit and opportunity around sustainability for businesses around investment and raising finance. So we're seeing now a real shift, and this is from high street banks through to private equity, where sustainability is starting to become a factor in an organisation, a business's ability to raise money and funding, essentially. And that's starting to become an increasing trend. I was talking to somebody from a private equity house in Manchester last week, and they were talking about some of the things that they're doing, and that increasing ESG agenda amongst businesses, and that being a requirement from investors now, is really starting to drive some change in the marketplace we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another one of those drivers for change. There's a lot of barriers to change that we've touched on, but there are a lot of these advantages, and yeah, we're seeing it more and more. If you can demonstrate that you're a responsible organisation, however you define that, then you're going to be giving investors confidence that you're going to be around for long enough to show a return on investment, essentially. I always say there's never been something so pervasive and predictable as and impactful as climate change, but nearly all businesses are unprepared for it. Like when you look at how many businesses there are, like how many of them actually have robust sustainability strategies, or it's even on the agenda. And if you're an investor, that's not a good sign, because it's clearly something that's going to happen. I know that finance, the banking industry in particular, is really hot on climate risk at the moment, because if you're looking at investing in something, you don't want to be ending up with stranded assets, or investing in something where you're going to be impacted. You're buying something that's reliant on a material from the other side of the world, and climate change means that's not going to be viable anymore. These are huge risks. So showing that you're at least cognizant of these risks and working on a plan, at least working on something, then that gives a lot more assurance that you a company to work with and invest with.
Yeah, and I think it's something that businesses are really ignorant to, and it's not just overseas supply chain issues. It's like if you have localized flooding, and we're starting to see that in the UK increasingly. You can't insulate yourself as a business against that. You can put a wall up around your factory to stop maybe it flooding, but people can't get to work because the road's flooded and things. So it's just too much out of your control, and we're seeing more and more of that. And we've got clients that on the other side of it, less to do with what would be seen as adverse weather type conditions, but when we had the heat wave last year, they had to close their business and lost significant amounts of income as a result of that. And we're expecting to see more of those sort of days where it's either extremely hot or the more obvious stuff, which is the flooding and things like that as well, which is generally perceived as being more impactful. But
in a way, we're sort of quite fortunate as people working in this industry, because the case for change is getting easier. Because when I first heard about climate change, it was from my guidance counsellor in 1998, who advised me not to do a film studies course, because I was into Dawson's Creek, the TV show at the time, and I wanted to be a director. She said, go into sustainability and climate change work, because it's going to be a huge business challenge in the future, and there's going to be loads of jobs in that world. And I mostly believed her, if I'm honest, because she was the first person I ever saw use a keyboard shortcut. So I do copy and paste, and I was like, wow. So I did an environmental science undergraduate degree, and she was sort of right, but way before her time, because certainly on the jobs front, because I think we're only now starting to see that huge uptick where there's a lot of jobs in this area. But we are definitely seeing that now, and we are definitely starting to see climate impact. We're in climate change now. It's no longer something that we warn about happening in the future. We're living in it, and it's absolutely something that businesses have all been affected by already to some extent, and that's going to get more and more impactful as we go forward, and as we get other impacts. As climate change kicks in and we get all sorts of issues with geopolitics and stuff like that, it's going to be a crazy future. Which is part of my thinking recently on strategizing for change. It's going to be so hard to predict the future. I think businesses almost have to just embrace chaos, because the world's going to get so chaotic in the future. You need to learn to just get comfortable with that and embed things like agility. So how fast can you change? How aware can you be of the changes that are coming forward, and have the willingness to adapt to them? I think they're going to be huge issues. Or the three key skills I would say for a lot of businesses are those three.
I agree. And you've only got to look what's happened in the last week or so with changes to the political landscape around things like net zero, which are significant impacts to some businesses. If you're a car manufacturer, for instance, massive impact if you've been told that the EV strategy is changing, energy companies, etc. and heating installation companies. You know, that impact of just quick political change it can have on your organisation. The change piece is an interesting one, and it's one that we see as well with clients. You know, you don't want to be setting out that long-term 2050 agenda as to how you're going to decarbonise, because you can't think that far ahead. You know, I touched on it earlier. Most businesses are thinking in, you know, maybe the next 12 months and how do we survive. 3 years at best on a planning cycle, and maybe thinking out to 5 years if you've got a really long strategic view. But it needs that short-termism as well around planning for sustainability. And it needs that integration into your strategy within your business as well. The two things need to be really interlinked, we see.
Yeah.
You were talking about products and things before, and actually that has been one of the biggest benefits for organisations. You know, companies that have a product and being able to create a more sustainable version of that. And there's a couple of bits of research that back this up. CERN Institute did some work and said that brands marketing products as being sustainable, those products grew about 6 times faster than the non-sustainably marketed counterparts. And if you look at somebody like Unilever, 75% of their growth comes from their sustainable living brands, and they're growing about 6 times faster than, again, their non-sustainable alternatives. And we know we've got clients where they've introduced sustainable products into their offering, and that's been the big driver of growth. We've got an organisation we work with called Concept Product, and great case study on the site. And one of the things they did was they supply essentially sort of workwear and safety equipment to the festival industry, so the likes of Glastonbury, one of their clients, and some horrible products that they were really keen to kind of move away from, things like that awful orange plastic fencing you see up in these sort of events and things. And they moved to more sustainable alternatives as a bit of a request from their clients. You know, Glastonbury were really looking to make the festival more sustainable. They were seeing increasing pressures in the sector, but saw that as an opportunity because others weren't doing anything. Introduced loads of sustainable alternatives into the product line, and actually they're the things that have grown really quick, and that's driven their business forward. And their turnover grew about 20% as a result of the introduction of those new products. They drove that growth. And I see that as being a huge opportunity for organisations of shifting from a non-sustainable based solution to something that's more sustainable, and that generating new markets, opening up new customers, retaining existing ones as well, and increasing revenue from them. But we see a lot of that going on as well.
Yeah, no, totally. I think you see the benefit from that, as we've touched on. It's customers increasingly being switched onto this agenda, or these issues, and wanting products that people sense aren't going to make the planet a worse place to live on. Yeah. And then there's the supply chains as well. If you're not worried about it, it's likely that the people, if you're selling to a business, they're probably going to be worried about it, because if they're a lot bigger than you, they're going to be under pressure. So if you can provide a solution that helps them do that, then you've got a real opportunity to try to get more work with them. And I also think that sort of stuff's almost like the more exciting sort of aspect of sustainability. I think I love working with a product and saying, how can we make this thing more sustainable? I worked on a project over 10 years ago now, and in that team we took a vacuum cleaner for a supermarket and looked at how circular it was, and it got dismantled, and we looked at how easy would it be to essentially recycle or reuse, and they found things like I think something like 9 different types of plastic. Not all of them were recyclable. It could have all been made out of the same type of plastic, like recyclable plastic, so instantly that's a recyclable thing. Umpteen different types of screw, which would have made it really difficult to dismantle. Loads of joints broke as you took it apart, so it was completely unreusable. And I think it was around 300 grams of material that there was just no need for.
Right.
So that's just a waste of material. The weight would make it more expensive to transport around as well. And you could easily have designed that product to have a lot less material in it, to use less energy, to be lighter, and just all around be a more sustainable product. And that's why I'm really interested at the moment in sustainable design, because I think, you know, everything in this room, the policies that we have, it's all been designed by someone at the end of the day, or a boardroom of people probably. And design, I think, has got such capacity to help solve a lot of these problems. And I know the UK Design Council recently sort of pivoted to this concept of Design for Planet, which I think is a really good tool, which sort of speaks to, like, usually when solutions are designed, we talk about whether it's technologically viable, economically feasible, or if it's desirable for the end user. And I think we just need to sort of add in this, is it desirable for people and planet as well at a broader level, rather than just the end user? Because that's great, and it will result in a beautiful product that someone likes to use, but probably will also increase in consumption if it's something that people like to use. But if you embed environmental or wider societal thinking into that design process, no matter what you're designing, whether it is a policy or this chair or a product that you sell in your business, you're going to end up with something that's going to do a lot less harm for the planet and make people want to buy it, essentially. So you're going to do better in your business as well.
Yeah. And I see a lot of movement towards that, in terms of longevity of products, reusability of products, etc. There seems to be a real shift in the marketplace around that, and whether that's from big fashion retailers, it doesn't seem to matter which sector, everybody, we've seen it with technology companies at the moment, and phones having to be repairable, etc., standardization of charging cables and things, which is a good thing. I don't know how many I end up with where I've left one somewhere and have to buy another one of them. So to see that being standardized and simplified all helps, and I think it's some of those small, the mounting up of some of the small things sometimes can have quite a big effect. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Really interesting conversation, Graham. What are you working on at the minute at the university? Are you still involved in sustainability projects? Are you doing anything similar to EcoEye?
Yeah, absolutely. So EcoEye was one of the last projects funded by the ERDF before Brexit, and that just finished up last week. So I'm now working with a major UK bank on sustainability and corporate responsibility.
Okay.
So we're looking at training the senior managers in the bank and the middle managers on corporate responsibility and how they can embed a lot of that thinking in the products and services that they deliver and the way they work. And looking also at carbon literacy, so how we can help to take the wider workforce forward on the sustainability agendas, just to help with that whole culture change idea.
Yeah.
So that's a really exciting project to work on, because I think that's such a untapped market in a way. Where it's, when you look at the carbon emissions associated with things like investments in fossil fuels and things like that, I think there's huge scope there. So a really exciting project.
Yeah.
And always looking for businesses to work with as well through projects such as EcoEye. So we're looking at a follow-up to EcoEye in the future.
Great.
So if a business is interested in sort of academic support and the sort of technology solutions that we can help with, like 3D printing or hydrogen or all these things that I say real scientists use, not just scientists who sit behind a laptop like myself, then feel free to get in touch.
Great.
I'm sure we can help out.
Brilliant. Graham, thanks very much for your time. It's been really interesting. Great to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Stephen.